in this next week. The first type of change is the gradual approach. This is the change of gradually chipping away excess stone. This is the change that we see in nature with the water sweeping away the stone, making it thinner, over time making it smoother. The gradual change. This is the change that we mostly see in the world. It's the healthy change. There is no quick fix. It takes time. However, the change process can be as enjoyable as the outcome. Think about learning how to play a musical instrument. It takes time, and it's, by the way, the same process because we are creating new neural pathways in our brain when we learn a musical instrument. We can enjoy the process, the 10 years that it takes us to get to play in a concert in Leverett JCR. We can enjoy the process of getting there before we're there. So the change process in and of itself can also be fun. We can enjoy the journey as well as the destination. It takes time, a lot of time. Then there is also the acute approach to change. You know, if the metaphor for the gradual change was the water breaking down stone, the metaphor for acute approach is taking a sledgehammer and breaking the stone. You know what Moses did. The acute change doesn't take as much time. It happens immediately. But the important thing to keep in mind with the acute change is that it's not a quick fix. The acute change very often takes a lot of preparation. Metaphorically speaking, you need a lot of strength to pick up that hammer and to have the power to put it down. So it takes time. Both take time. And that's important to keep in mind. Why? Marty Seligman. The belief that we can rely on shortcuts to gratification and bypass the exercise of personal strength and virtue is folly. It leads to legions of humanity who are depressed in the middle of great wealth and are starving to death spiritually. This is one of the main reasons for the unhappiness in the world today. I alluded to it, but I want to elaborate a little bit more before we end. How many here have read, by the way, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey? Okay, quite a few. It's a wonderful book, one of the best, if not the best, self-help books out there. Stephen Covey, at the beginning of the book, talks about the research that he did for his PhD, and what he did was look at the success literature of the last 200 years. And what he found was that there was a real cutoff point in 1930. Until 1930, 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, self-help was about character change. It was about changing who you are from the inside. It was about struggle and hard work and failing and getting up again, going through hardships and changing step by step, slowly, gradually. 1930, radical change. From character change, it became quick fix. Think and grow rich. How to win friends and influence people. Do it now. The secret. Quick change, immediate change, easy change. And from the 1930s, what we see is a decline in people's levels of well-being. Much more depression, much more anxiety, and one of the reasons is that people hope and believe that they can find the quick fix. There is no quick fix. It takes time. It takes time to change. However, the change process can be as enjoyable, as fun, as exciting as ultimately achieving the change. And next week, we'll talk about that wonderful process. Have a good weekend. Hi, good morning. So Today's lecture is about change, and things are going to change today. Our relationship is going to change today, so stay tuned. Last time we ended by talking about the different kinds of change. The first approach, the gradual approach, like water wearing down stone, chipping away gradually, slowly, taking our time. The second approach, the acute change, the sledgehammer breaking stone, creating a new pathway, new channel. And the important thing to keep in mind with both forms of changes, with all form of change, lasting change that is, which is what we're about, not just the spike and the return to base level. The thing to keep in mind about change is that neither is quick fix. Even when we pick up that sledgehammer, even when we pick it up, we need to do a lot of work before the preparation. So for example, gradual change, slow change would be doing the gratitude exercise every day, slowly becoming more and more of a benefit finder, gradually looking more at the positive, creating a new neural pathway, neuron by neuron. Remember, neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, two very important concepts, because just by knowing, by understanding that our brain changes, that in and of itself makes us more likely to change. And this is work done by Carol Dweck, whom I'll discuss in future courses when we discuss perfectionism. And then the sledgehammer example is like the eureka experience, the great insight that doesn't come in a vacuum. It comes after a lot of hard work, after a lot of preparation. You know, the 99% perspiration that leads to that inspiration. So no quick fix. And the belief in quick fix, the expectation of a quick fix, that is one of the reasons why levels of depression are so high today. Because people are frustrated, they're disappointed, they think that there is something wrong with them when they don't succeed in the quick fix, but I just read in a book that it's possible that if I do these 5 things, I'll be happy for the rest of my life. And I do these 5 things, and I'm not happier. And then I begin to question myself. No quick fix. It takes time. No 5 easy steps to happiness. Before we go into the change process, there are a few things we need to understand. The first thing to understand is this. Do you really want to change? Do I really want to improve certain things in my personality, things that, or character, or behavior, things that I don't like? And it's not a trivial question. It is not a rhetorical question. Because very often on the conscious level we may be saying yes, but on the subconscious level something is stopping us. Let me show you an example. So this is a study done by Langer and Thompson back in the 80s. And here is what they did. They brought students in, or participants in, and they asked them whether they wanted to get rid of a certain characteristic, like rigidity, or being gullible, or grimness. And they asked them whether they wanted to get rid of these characteristics and whether they succeeded in becoming better in this area. Were you able to introduce change? So were you able to actually become less rigid, if this was important for you to change, or less gullible, or less grim? So this is the first 2 questions that they asked. Did you want to improve on it? Did you want to change this? And the second question, were you successful? And then after they answered these questions, there was a second part to this study, where they asked them to evaluate the following positive characteristics. Consistency. Is it important to you? Is it important to you to be trustworthy? And how important it is for you to be and to be perceived as a serious person. Now here is the interesting finding in this research. Those individuals who rated the positive traits, the ones in yellow, who rated them high as personally important to them, were less likely to change the negatives. Do you understand the implications of this study? So what it's saying is that, let's say I do want to get rid of rigidity. I don't like being rigid. However, at the same time, consistency is a very important value to me. I'm less likely to change my rigidity because they're associated in my mind. And yeah, I don't want to be rigid, but at the same time, subconscious talking here, I want to be consistent. Don't let go of this rigidity because I couple them, I associate them together. Not wanting to get rid of one because I don't want the baby out with the bathwater. And to me, they're linked. The same with gullibility and trustworthiness. We can say that the other side of gullibility is someone who is trustworthy. Now, going to the extreme, I become gullible. However, I don't get rid of my gullibility because I don't want to also get rid of my trustworthiness. Same with grim. I may be grim, but that's also subconsciously a sign of my seriousness. You know, for years, literally years, when I've been thinking and writing and analyzing the notion of perfectionism, I couldn't understand why it didn't get better for a very long time. Because I knew perfectionism was hurting me. I read the research and I looked through personal experiences. I knew that it was hurting me in terms of my well-being for sure, but also in the long term in terms of my success. And yet I couldn't get rid of perfectionism until I read the study. And I asked myself, okay, so what's the counterpart to perfectionism? What's tied in my mind? What goes hand in hand for me with perfectionism? What goes hand in hand is drive and ambition. Now, if I had to define myself, this is one of the first things that I would define myself as. I'm driven and I'm ambitious. And because I didn't want to lose these characteristics, my subconscious didn't let me, stopped me from getting rid of the perfectionism. Perfectionism, which I define as a debilitating fear of failure. A failure that prevents us, and we'll have a whole week on perfectionism, so we'll get more in depth, you'll understand what it means. And it was only once I understood that for me these two things go hand in hand, I was able to unpack them, to distinguish them, and said, I want to keep one, not the other. Or, for example, worry and anxiety. Again, I've mentioned this many times before. Next time I'll talk to you about the process that I underwent to overcome anxiety. Part of me, since the time I can remember myself, being anxious, whether it's before matches in squash, whether it's before exams, whether it's before speaking up in section when I was an undergrad. And I wanted to stop that. I didn't want that. However, I didn't let go of worry and anxiety because I also saw it with responsibility. Well, if I'm anxious, it means I'm responsible, so I prepare for class much more as opposed to just let go and become a slacker. So I associated a positive trait, which is responsibility. And remember Brandon, no one is coming. Very important trait, responsibility. But that prevented me from letting go, subconscious level, not conscious, of the worry and anxiety that I often experienced. Guilt. Again, there's good guilt, there's bad guilt. You know, it is. Well, I don't want to get rid of guilt because would that mean I'm not being empathic and sensitive toward other people? Very often, we connect the two. They go hand in hand. Another couple is the notion of simplifying. This is something very personal to me. I wanted to do less because I knew that taking on too many activities was actually hurting me, was hurting my productivity, creativity, well-being. I couldn't simplify. Why? Because I associated in my mind with losing my edge. So I didn't let go. Or fault finding. We talked about this a week ago. Why do people not let go of fault finding? Why do they remain pessimistic? Because they connect it with a sense of realism. I don't want to stop being realistic. I don't want to be one of those detached Pollyannas, and therefore I don't let go of my fault finding. Happiness. One of the most significant barriers to people's happiness is that they associate happiness with slacking off. Because the dominant paradigm, the dominant mantra in our culture today is no pain, no gain. And if I'm happy now, i.e. not experiencing pain, it means I'm letting go. It means I'm not going to be successful. It means I'm going to lose my edge. It means I'm going to lose my drive and ambition. So our subconscious prefers to keeps us unhappy so that we don't lose the other things that we value highly. Things such as ambition, things such as having an edge, things such as our hard work. Now, of course, when we look at them, we know that they don't necessarily have to go hand in hand. On the contrary, for example, happiness, we know from the broaden and build theory that positive emotions are actually associated with higher levels of success. Or as I'll talk about after spring break when we talk about perfectionism, we know from research, you'll be able to connect it also on the person, many of you will be able to connect on the personal level. We know that letting go of this fear of failure and coping, putting ourselves on the line more, learning from failures, looking at it as a stepping stone, that contributes to our success in the long term. It doesn't need to take away from our drive and ambition. On the contrary. And the key, if we want to overcome this fear of failure, or the worry and anxiety, or the guilt, or this lack of happiness, is very often, not always, very often about understanding or gaining a better understanding of these characteristics. For example, understanding that I want to let go of my fear of failure, the debilitating fear of failure, not just fear of failure, because everyone is afraid of failing to some extent. But to let go of the debilitating fear of failure and yet maintain my drive and ambition. So a more nuanced understanding. They don't need to go hand in hand. Or I never used to be able to say no to people. Such a short word, such an easy word, so difficult at times to say. Why? Because I see myself and I want other people to see me as empathic, as sensitive, as a nice guy. But then I unpack the two. And I realize it doesn't have to go hand in. I can say no to people very sensitively. Because very often when I say yes to others, I'm saying no to myself. And in the long term, very often to the relationship. So now I have a better, more nuanced understanding of when I can say no and when I don't want to say no, while maintaining my sensitivity and my empathy, without experiencing the same levels of guilt that I experienced before whenever I said no. And the same you can do for every one of these characteristics. So think about, what if you wanted to change for a very long time and weren't successful in? Was it perfectionism? Was it, this very serious grimness, and you wanted to be more playful? Well, maybe you didn't want to get rid of it because you were afraid of losing your seriousness. And you don't need to. The baby can stay, the bathwater can go, if we have a more nuanced understanding of what it is we want to change. In section next week, you're going to do an exercise with your teaching fellows called sentence completion. In that exercise, this is exactly what you're going to do. You're going to identify, it's an exercise devised by Nathaniel Branden. You're going to do an exercise that will help you identify what you want to get rid of and what you want to keep. And very often that switch that you make in your mind, subconscious as well as conscious mind, can open the floodwaters, the gate to a new channel, new pathway in our brain, real lasting change.